Hey, Chandler Bowl here, and joining me today is Brad Lomenick. Brad's the author of one of my favorite leadership books of all time, H3 Leadership, also the author of the book, The Catalyst Leader. He's the former president of Catalyst, which, if you've ever heard of that, just a massive leadership movement. He's also the founder of Blink, a boutique strategic advisory firm. And I read his book and recently got to know him, which has been fun. And it was in my year of leadership. And so I was reading all books leadership, and Omer on my team said, hey, if you're reading leadership books, you got to read this one. Loved it. And then just our paths randomly connected years later through Brett Hagler of News Story, and then us getting to hang out in Colorado on a ranch. And it's just been fun as a admirer of your work and lover of your book, just getting to know you. So I'm super excited to have you here. Welcome.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks, Chandler. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Self-Publishing School podcast. I might learn something.
Sir.
I hope I give some value, but I might learn something too.
Oh, there's gonna be lots of value. So we'll talk H3 leadership in a little bit, and there's kind of some through lines that I want to touch on. I mean, 532 reviews, the book's done incredibly well. But I want to kind of before we get there, I want to take it back. Why write your first book? I think it was The Catalyst Leader. Was your first book. Like, what sparked that, and how did that fit into kind of like what you're doing in your business and all those things?
Well, I was running Catalyst, and we didn't really have a brand book. We had lots of people who were showing up speaking at Catalyst events who had lots of books. And John Maxwell, who was, really our founder and the person who gave us the opportunity to build Catalyst, he had tons of books in leadership, obviously. Andy Stanley was perhaps the most recognized voice and connected to Catalyst, as many people thought Andy started it and was running it. Andy had lots of books. And I never really saw myself as an author. But many people started to say, Brad, it's time. Like you need to write this book, and you also need to write a book on behalf of Catalyst. And, it was sort of like I was that person in the captain's chair that made sense for me to step into that. And, so I wouldn't say it was highly strategic, other than I finally just felt like enough people were saying that I should jump into that pool. And, I still don't consider myself an author. I mean, I've written a couple of books, but let me say it differently. I'm not a writer. I'm an author, but I'm not a writer, because some people love to write. And I feel like I have a message. Sometimes it might come out through a book, but there's people who are writers that they live to write, and that's not me.
Yeah. Now, and I want to unpack that a little bit later, because I'm the same exact way. But first, you mentioned a word, brand book. We didn't have a brand book. What do you mean by that? And why do you think that's something that's important for an organization like the type of organization that you were leading?
Well, I think to look at it from the perspective of both how the brand is pushed out into the market, but also what are the stories and what captures the essence of an organization or a brand. And we had lots of brochures, we had a website, we had all these marketing pieces, but we didn't have something that would outlast us. And so for me, that was a big part, was what are the things that 20 or 30 years from now, even if Catalyst goes away as an organization, there's still going to be this remnant that will be around for forever. And so that's why we looked at it organizationally and said, well, let's at least have something that feels like a tangible expression for somebody who would never show up to a conference too, because it would be naive to think that everybody in the world is going to at some point experience your brand in person. So that's why books are so important, is because they're the lasting legacy many times of something, especially a conference movement, that you might impact 1% of the audience that you feel like you want to really connect with through a conference. But a book is, it's going to be around for a long time.
And so how did that, I love that you say that, because I totally agree. And it's kind of like the Zig Ziglar quote of, or where he talks about, someone can show up to my talk and it might inspire them, but it won't change their life. But when they show up to my talk, they can buy my books. And then with those books, I can make true lasting impact. So how did you see that brand book building legs to what you guys were doing from a conference perspective, from a like in-person events perspective? Like, what were the benefits, or how did that kind of fuel, whether it be the speaking team, the events? Like, what did that tangibly look like of feeding that movement?
Ultimately, it was, I felt like it was a resource that would, for those people who might even be coming to a conference, it was going to be a resource that would, they could connect between events. And anybody that does conferences, you know that the ongoing connection, conversation, the way that people learn, there has to be some points of intersection. And so, that book really was, we were trying to like hit that felt need, which was, if you have a team, if you come to the conference, then this is a great book for now the next steps. And that's why we did a a small group curriculum to go with it. That's why we did a video curriculum to go with it. We tried to create as many pieces around the Catalyst leader that would actually allow somebody to show up to an event and then go, okay, what's next, Brad? And then it's like, here you go. This is the way you continue to learn. And obviously, not everybody who reads it or connects with the book is going to come to that conference experience, but that was the target. If we were just like really focused on, if we only do one thing with this book, what would it be? And it was, this is the next step piece that we're going to allow you to go on a 12-month journey, between Catalyst 2013 and Catalyst 2014.
That's great. And did you see that affect book sales, like kind of tying that into the event or in between
Well,
events?
yes, and especially the first year and the first couple of years that it was out, um, you know, every author would love to have a conference with 13 or 14,000 leaders showing up to be able to release their book at. I mean, that was not fair. I mean, we sold, or we moved probably 25,000 books the first week it was out, just through our channels, because we basically said to all those leaders who were there of that first event when it released, hey, listen, like, we want you to take home 10 copies of this book. So we made it feel like this is, again, your team experience going forward is to, and we made it really cheap. Like, that's the beauty of a book, when you can tap into your author discount with a traditional publisher. Then you can say, hey, it's going to come out in a month in retail and it's going to be $20, but you can get it here today for $5. So we created some bundles that were really effective, because people would go, well, sure, I'll pay $50 for a 10-pack of the Catalyst Leader, because I'm going to go through it with my staff when we get back, and then we're going to give it to our young leaders on our team. So that was part of our launch strategy early on, and it worked pretty well.
That's awesome. And so let's fast forward a little bit to H3 leadership. And then I want to kind of circle back and draw comparisons and lessons learned and differences and all those things. So why go on? I mean, I think it was a couple of years later that you launched H3 leadership. So why write that book? How did that fit into the big picture of things? And then we can kind of walk through some of the things you did to launch that well.
If Catalyst was the brand book, Catalyst Leader was the brand book, H3 was my book. So it's my personal story. It's much more of my personal mantra, and it's my life brand book. So I still love the Catalyst Leader. It's my first book I ever wrote. But for me, H3 leadership is if somebody says, Brad, boil down your leadership paradigm, your framework, that's it. And so this is my life legacy book. And sometimes you hear that from people, their sophomore book many times is their life book. And it's part of it's because they kind of figured out after book one what they really wanted to be when they grew up, as an author. And so it was 2 years later, in terms of when it released, and it's had a bigger shelf life. And I don't know why. I mean, I think both books are good. I think H3, though, people read it and it feels more personal. And And again, like the lesson is that the more personal you are in your book, the more practical and personal, I think the more people are impacted by it. Where Catalyst Leader was, it was a little bit more, again, of a brand book. And it was the story of a brand. It was a story of like this movement. So those are some of the differences.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, talk to me about, are you glad you wrote them in that order and went brand book, then personal book? Do you feel like that helped you write the second book earlier? If you went back, would you go and flip flop them? Like, what are your thoughts on the order of writing those and whether or not that was
I would,
beneficial or not?
well, I wouldn't change the order because H3 was also it was really built on a season when I stepped out of running Catalyst. So I couldn't change the order because Catalyst Leader was I'm sort of in the sweet spot of leading this thing. H3 was me walking through a bit of dysfunction as a leader in my own leadership, but also then like stepping out and stepping away from leading Catalyst. And so that's the process of those two. I can't change them because then it would mess up the timing of that story.
For sure. I guess if you were to like put that aside and say like the actual writing of the book, independent of, because
Yeah.
obviously that piece, like, what are your thoughts on that? Because it's probably a little bit of a leading question, but I'm really just curious to get your thoughts, because I always recommend, and we always recommend, it's like the brand book first, and then the
Yeah.
personal one's usually harder to write because it's like usually exactly what you're saying, like working through those type of things. But I was just curious if that was your experience or not, and whether or
Yeah.
not kind of doing the brand book that's a little bit more copy paste, like, oh, I'm in this every day, this is easier to write, and now I'm going to go for like the life's work legacy drop the mic kind of book. But was that your experience?
Yeah. I do think that I think writing your life message is better as a second book for sure, or even a third book for that matter. But I,
Yeah.
I think you need some reps, but before you really double down on, again, what is the book that if all the other books go away, that you want
Mm,
you want to make sure sticks around. And for me, it's H3 leadership, so
yeah.
I'm glad I had a book under me, or I'm glad I walked through that process before, partly because of the writing and the process of putting the book together, but also because of the process of creating awareness for the book. Because that's the part anymore. Like if you're an author, you're also a marketer. So you better have some reps in regards to how you're going to talk about it, promote it, get the word out. And so I'm glad I had that early process. It was a little bit different for me, Chandler, because I had the weight of the engine of Catalyst to help me promote the Catalyst Leader. I did not necessarily have all the weight in the engine of Catalyst to help me promote H3 leadership. And so I had to like get pretty like medieval on, just sort of hand to hand combat in terms of H3, because it was pretty much like on my back. And Catalyst helped me, but it wasn't the same. I didn't have like the entire organization sort of behind it.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Like, let's talk about that. Because I think that's the part that will be most relatable and helpful for people. It's like, okay, how do I promote my book without the weight of this huge organization behind me? So can you walk us through that? How did you promote H3 leadership from a, and there's like so many rabbit trails I want to go down, but let's maybe just start with this of just how did you promote the book? And when you say hand-to-hand combat, like what did that look like from a specifically a launch perspective?
Well, hand to hand meeting, like friend to friend.
Yeah.
So I remember and I did this for Catalyst Leader as well, but for H3, I think I personally texted probably 300 friends during the launch week at some point, and just said, "Hey, here's a copy and paste blurb that I would love for you to put up somewhere on one of your channels, whatever you choose the channel." Because if you ask for too much, if you ask, can you put this on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn, and nah, you're getting nothing. So all I did was just did a copy and paste blurb. Please paste this today And I sent that out like to lots and lots and lots and lots of friends, just to get them, make it really easy for them. I think so many times we think, well, that friend's going to help us, and we send this massive email with all these options and all these like graphics and all like, and you know what I do when I get those is I delete it, and then I text the person who's got a book coming out and say, hey, can you send me something right now? Can you text me something that I can copy and paste, and I'm done with it? So you get one shot with your friends or influencers. You get one shot. Don't ask for a bunch. Just do one thing. So that was a big part of it. The other part, I think podcasts are the best outlet for book promotion. And never before have there been so many podcasts that you can actually be on and talk about your new book. And the beauty is this: one, it's free. Two, people who are doing podcasts are looking for good content. So if you have good content, they probably will want you on at some point. I mean, they're out looking for different voices to have on. So I've probably been on, I don't know, 200 podcasts in the last couple of years, and I'm still doing interviews about H3. Like I just did one the other day, and they were like, "All right, we're on with Brad Lomenick, he just released a new book, the H3 Leadership," and I didn't say anything because to their audience, they don't know. they think that my book just came out, even though it came out like 4 years ago. So the only person that cares about the release date is you as the author, and maybe like your publisher or somebody, whoever you're working with. Nobody else cares at all, like when your book came out. So, your book is new to the person who just heard about it, and treat it that way. So podcast and personal connections where you're actually asking for somebody to promote your book. I'll stop there and let you comment, but I can go on with more if you want to.
For sure. And I'll comment on this, and I'll just volley back to you for anything else that you remember that worked with from specifically a launch for H3 Leadership. But I love that you mentioned that, because I do the same exact thing. It's like your recent book is your new book until you release
Yes.
another one.
Yes.
So it's like, I just put out a new book. This, for me, it's published, my book published. And even though that book was 4 years ago, and I guess yours is about 5,
Yep.
5 and some change, mine's 4 and some change. It's your new book, because like you
Exactly.
said, it's new to that audience. So anything else that you remember working really well from a launch perspective that sold the most copies for H3 Leadership?
Well, I mean, definitely like having some gatherings. So Catalyst Leader for sure. That one, the biggest lift was the actual Catalyst conference, and and I had insider connections, right? So that was and I launched H3 at Catalyst, and we moved quite a few books. So if you have an outlet where I think you can have a launch. And again, don't only think that it's the launch around the launch. I mean, it could be a launch 2 years later with a new audience, or a conference or a group of leaders. And so the mindset for me is always, I'm going to figure out a way to think innovatively about how I approach any outlets where there might be quite a few leaders gathering. And for some of us who speak for a living, like one option would be, and I saw Scott Harrison do this with when he launched his book Thirst back a couple of years ago, the founder of Charity Water, and arguably, and I got to help Scott a little bit on the launch, arguably probably the best marketing plan for a book I've ever seen. And part of the reason was that because Charity Water is so good at marketing, their branding, just the way they approach, they're innovative. Like they did the marketing plan, and the publisher will remain unnamed, but the publisher they worked with were sort of like, well, yes, in fact, you guys should be in charge of the marketing plan. And they wrote the checks, and they allowed for the charity water team to pretty much build the plan from scratch. But one of the things Scott did is because he speaks a lot of places, and he basically said, I'm gonna trade in some ways my speaking honorariums or whatever you call it, and instead I would like for you to just buy the book, and we'll figure out a price that makes sense. And so he steered a lot of that into the book getting launched, and then they were very innovative with how they approached like how those books went out to people, and the way they even created like a moment of connection when somebody got it in the mail. And so that's something else I did is I actually like just sort of flipped the model and said, okay, for the next 6 or 9 months, let's just take all the speaking or anything I'm doing where I might get paid, and let's flip that into just buy books. And you can move a lot of books even if you don't speak that much. You can end up moving some books pretty quickly. The other thing that I love to do is um, I love to really like figure out ways to, again, make it, if you're showing up somewhere, make it so easy for that organization to actually help promote your book and actually sell your book. So even if they're not buying them from you, but give them an opportunity to sell your book through their channel at a price that they go, well, why wouldn't we? Um, and everybody even says nowadays, just send them to Amazon. Well, maybe, but I would rather like actually uh, undercut Amazon a little bit and instead make my book, okay, it's $5 and we've got 500 copies, and the first people that buy it at $5, those 500 copies, once they're gone, they're gone. And so those kind of things where you can get creative with an organization or outlets where they'll partner with you, because otherwise you're another author with another book, and you just fit in with all the hundreds who showed up. So you have to think outside the box in terms of how you want to move copies, and then show up with actually a plan that makes it like a no-brainer, where somebody goes, well, that totally makes sense. We would love to do that.
Yeah, that's so great. Love that. And guys, if you're listening to this, watching this, check out the episode with our mutual friend. I actually met him because of you, Carlos Whitaker. He goes in a whole lot of detail about exactly that, is like using speaking engagements and creativity. I think he talks about how crafting his talk to increase, I think it's from 9 to 25% of the room at every
Yeah.
talk purchases a
Yes.
book, and just all kinds of things on that. I want to talk for a second, Brad. What did you learn between the launch of the leader and H3 leadership? And how did, like, what were the lessons that you learned from that specific to promotion and launch that changed the way you promoted H3 leadership?
Yeah, I probably did less. I did less influencer marketing with H3 compared to Catalyst Leader. Meaning, we probably sent out, I don't know, 1,000 of the books, and we put them in like a really nice, a well-designed box. We spent a lot of money, or the publisher spent a lot of money on the launch and the release of Catalyst Leader, and we put a lot of energy into let's get the book into the hands of an influencer. And some of the thinking was, well, one, they're friends of mine, so I just want them to have a copy of my book because it's my first book. But two, some of the thinking was, well, if they get it in a nice box and they're impressed with the way it's packaged and they open it up, they're going to want to tweet or post it on Facebook or Instagram it. And a lot of them did. With H3, we didn't do a lot of that. I don't think we did any of that, actually. And not because I don't think it works, but I felt like, again, I wanted to go much more the strategy, which was, instead of sending them a box, why don't I just text them and say, hey, can you post about this? And maybe I put a picture of my book cover, in the text. And the reason is because I already sort of knew these people. And so, to your question, the change in strategy was I had become friends over 2 years with a lot of those people, even more than I was 2 years ago. So I didn't feel like I needed to wow them with a $12 box. sent in the mail. And I think a lot of times we end up sort of doing the same things. And a lot of that, like I loved brainstorming about like how do we create something that's a wow factor that they're going to get in the mail. But the real practical side of me was no, I'll just text them. And so I would say this: the lesson was I went from, I would say, probably more of a broad approach to much more of a personal approach. And um, and I think even more like the next book I release, I think I'll even be more personal with my approach. And it's not because I don't want to I don't want to continue to expand the range of sort of all these influencers that might see my book, um, but because there's so much noise. I mean, I get, Chandler, I don't know about you. I probably get 5 or 6 books in the mail right now a week. And they're coming in, a lot of them are coming in like really nice packaging. And they're, you know, they're it's like the notes in there, and I'm overwhelmed. Like I can't tweet about every single book that I get in the mail. And so there's so much noise. How do you break through the noise? And I think you just got to be more personal. Because I know this, if I email out, the same thing with email strategy. With Catalyst Leader, we were sending out emails to thousands of people about the book. But when I send an email to my friend and it's personal, there's much more of a sense from them that they're going to respond to that and go, "Hey, this is
For
awesome.
sure.
Like I'll tell people about it." So
For sure.
that's probably the lesson that stands out the most is
That's
personal, personal, personal.
such a great takeaway, and I love it because anyone can do it. So if you're
Yeah.
listening to this, watch it, and you're like, "Oh, I don't have this big platform. I don't have an email list. I don't have thousands, tens of thousands of followers on social media and all that stuff." It's like everyone can do hand-to-hand combat and personalized outreach, and that's what actually moves the needle more than all the fancy stuff, more than all the fancy book boxes, the fancy book website, all those things. Like, yes, like you said, those are nice to have. Those are cool. They legitimize this project that you've been working on, but like just that the focus of the personalized outreach,
And
just is
also
such a needle mover.
on the just one little tip for, especially on the podcast side, or if you're reaching out to somebody you don't know and you want them to know about you, you want them to know about your book, you want to get on their podcast, you want them to become a friend. You have to start that process by adding value to them. Don't assume that just because you're reaching out that they're now obligated to respond to you. But figure out a way to add value to them, and don't start with, "Hey, I have a book coming out, and I'd love to be on your podcast." Like that's a pretty quick delete. But start with this: "Hey, Brad, um, I read your book, The H3 Leader. Really helpful, man. So good. A couple of takeaways I found in it. Da 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 da. I've handed my book out to other friends of mine. They love it. So well done, man. I also know about your work with Catalyst. What you're doing is you're doing your homework to honor me, and then just say thanks for all you've done, and that's it. Like at some point, I'll probably respond to that and go, "Hey, that's man, thank you. That was great. I'm so glad it's been helpful." Now you've created a connection. The next email to them might be, "Hey, by the way, is there anything I can do for you?" You know, figure out the best way to actually promote your book is to have plenty of assets on your side that you can use to promote somebody else's book. So if you've got a podcast and you've got an email list and you've got like you're willing to tweet about their thing, or you're willing to post on Instagram, or you got like a newsletter, or the more assets you have that you can now trade with other somebody else, the better off you're going to do in winning the right to be heard by them. But that so many times we just send the email, "Hey, I got a new book coming out, so you probably should have me on your podcast." Like, man, that's tough. That's a tough sell.
For sure. For sure. And I completely agree. A couple final questions. We're in the home stretch here. Is there anything specific that you've done to get so many reviews with this book? like 530 something reviews on H3 leadership. It's impressive. Like, I mean, there's probably the element of the personal outreach kind of overlap, but anything else or anything that you've seen drive a lot of reviews?
Well, I reached out to a handful of people and asked them to review the book. So I was very intentional with, I don't even care if you, I mean, I do want you to buy it, um, but I want you to review it. And if you just have to review it based on knowing me. So, because, it does help when you see a book and it's got some reviews, just like a podcast, when you see people who, and iTunes actually gives you in their algorithm, you know, you go up on the rankings if you have more reviews. But I did reach out intentionally early on with both books to a handful of people and said, "Hey, I'd love for you to buy the book. If you can't buy it, I'll send you one, but I'd love for you to review the book on Amazon specifically." So we started out with, I don't know, probably 80 to 90 when the book went live, which was great. Now I don't know, excuse me, I don't know why H3 has 5 times more reviews than the Catalyst Leader does, even though the Catalyst Leader's been out 2 more years more than H3. I think it's
Yeah,
because word of mouth. I think word of mouth, that friend telling friend is always, that's best marketing, but it's also the best way sometimes to create impact on people. And what I hear is pass along value of H3 is actually like exponentially more than Catalyst Leader. And so because of that pass along value, I think people feel a connection to the book, which then makes them, probably want to review it and tell more people about it. So
for sure.
it just has a natural, I guess it has a natural third party endorsement feel to it.
Yep.
So, and I wish I knew the answer to why do some books have that and some books don't. I would say this, I think because it's personal. Again, it's my story.
For
Like
sure.
people feel like after they read H3, they're like, "Brad, I feel like I know you. I feel like we're buddies now." And, maybe that's the reason that more people have reviewed it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's exactly how I found out about the book is someone on my team saying, "Hey, you got to read this book." And so that's, I think, is just illustrating that point. Final question I have is, knowing what you know now, what would you say to the Brads of the world, the Brad of how many ever 7, 8 years ago, pre-book one, to the folks who are about to go on that journey with their book one, kind of knowing what you know now, what would be your advice for those folks?
Well, the first thing would be, you're you don't you should start writing your book before you ever have a deal. And that was probably a mistake I made. Was I should have been writing a book for 10 years and, not waiting on somebody to say to me that I need to write a book. So, your book is being written all the time. And I know that's true now for me. Like I have a third book that I'm supposed to be writing that was due like 3 years ago. I'm way behind, but I'm writing it all the time. I mean, I'm capturing stuff all the time. It hasn't taken on a life that has a title and a direction yet. So that would be the first lesson is, start writing your book now. Don't wait until somebody tells you you have a deal. The second thing would be, make sure that the process is is both life giving as well as, I would say, enjoyable. But writing's hard, and I've heard people say, that writing's a lot like running. You don't necessarily, it doesn't get easier. You just get better because running doesn't get easier. If you want to run a 5 minute mile compared to a 6 minute mile, it's going to be painful. And so writing doesn't get easier, but you have to put a habit in place of actually doing it. But allow yourself to enjoy the journey. And if that means, I worked with a writer, so and I believe in that process because I'm not necessarily, as I said earlier, I'm not a writer. I'm an author. So don't crush your soul because you feel like you have to write a book. Meaning this, figure out the way you best will express your message, and then sort of coalesce all the things, if possible, that you can put in place to actually allow that message to come alive with the most amount of enjoyment along the journey. But don't feel like you have to get to the end of a writing journey of a year and go, oh my gosh, like if I ever have to do that again, you know, I won't. Because
100%.
I mean, you can record, sit in a room and record, have somebody interview you for 4 days straight, and hand that to a writer. And that's just one way to make the process something where you look at it and go, okay, we got that done. And that was, I look back and have fond memories of that.
For sure. That's awesome. And a great place to wrap up. Brad, this has been awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming in and just sharing your journey and experiences and tips. And I just love the focus and the personalization is kind of the theme throughout this whole interview. Where can people go to buy your book, to find out more about what you're up to?
Just go to my website is bradlomenick.com, LOMENICK.com. And then H3 Leadership is actually, you can find information about the book there, but also about the podcast. So either one of those websites are great. And then I'm Brad Lomenick at all the social media outlets as well.
Awesome. Brad, thanks so much, man.
Love it. Thanks for having me on, Chandler. This was fun, man.
Yes, sir.